Luigi's Mansion is a game that I will so vividly remember for the rest of my life, thanks to its confidence to push a character as widely recognized as the green-clad plumber Luigi into a completely different and unique format. Ghost houses and other spooky levels were previously present in Mario games to a minor extent. However, with the release of the GameCube and one of its most widely praised releases, the once relatively inexistent fright factor in the Mario series was blown completely out of proportion in an amazing way. Luigi's Mansion is a game focused on having eerie tones and an unsettling presence, while still maintaining the lighthearted personality one would typically expect from Nintendo's largest series. Despite being set entirely within a dark manor filled with tricks and traps, fear isn't the only thing to be encountered in this game. The charm usually apparent within most Mario games is still here, and present within characters such as Professor Elvin Gadd, Luigi himself, and of course, the game's bosses, the portrait ghosts. Many bosses encountered in games such as Super Mario 64, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars, or even Super Mario Bros. 2 were known for their wacky designs, interesting attack patterns, or unique personalities, and the portrait ghosts all make certain not to forget these key aspects. Each and every one of these ghosts is imbued with differing attacks, styles, personalities, traits, and even manners of speech dependent on their presumed ethnicities or classes. The chilly climber Sir Weston, who keeps himself frozen in a block of ice, comes just before the starving artist Vincent van Gogh, who, as is to be expected, speaks in a stereotypical French accent and spends his afterlife in the artist's gallery, painting ghosts and imbuing them with life. These are just two of the many unique portrait ghosts present in Luigi's Mansion, yet already, the levels of variety they're imbued with is more than apparent. It's only fair now that we shine the spotlight on all the others and talk about why each and every one of them is unique. As I just mentioned, every boss in this fantastic, although relatively short game is extremely unique from the one it precedes. This uniqueness is not only put on display with the ghost designs, but with their attacks, characteristic traits, and even the rooms they're fought in as well. The first portrait ghost encountered in the game, the bookish Father Neville, immediately displays all of these elements. Neville is the father of 3 children, and enjoys reading during his free time, which is apparent thanks to his towering wall of crammed bookshelves, many of which contain books centered around parenting. His attacks also consist of throwing books, and his design, despite being the first boss seen in the game, is far from bland. The second boss to be fought is the mirror-gazing mother Lydia, wife to Neville and mother to their 3 children. Obsessed with her looks, Lydia spends much of her time prepping her face in the mirror of her and her husband's bedroom. And while she doesn't truly attack the player, her design and room work in harmony with her personality to really sell to the player that this is, or at least was, a mother who fixates on her appearance. The next portrait ghost, despite its rather childish appearance, is actually the first of 4 major bosses within the game. The spoiled baby Chauncey is met within the nursery, peacefully asleep within his cradle, when he's awoken by the swinging of a nearby rocking horse and initiates a game with Luigi, in which he attempts to murder the plumber with his rattle and paranormal teddy bears, only to become livid when Luigi attempts to attack the child in self-defense. What then ensues is a nightmare-fueled battle, complete with massive wooden horses bouncing balls, bouncing babies, and ultimately, the death of an already dead child. The second area of the mansion opens up after the defeat of Chauncey, and it's where things really begin to open up and truly vary. An undead dancing couple is fought in the ballroom, followed by a pyrophobic butler who roams the halls before retreating to his cozy abode deep within the mansion's many diverging paths. A musician whose nostalgic, recognizable tunes can be heard from outside the room in which he resides is fought just before Mr. Luggs, a gluttonous killer who's never witnessed outside the dining room he wastes his afterlife away in. And following Area 2's main boss, Bogmire, the mysterious cemetery shadow, is Spooky, a hungry and far too playful bulldog fought by defeating skeletons and using their bones to lure the pup and subsequently suck him up. Area 3 continues with even more variety, as the player encounters a spectral bodybuilder known as Biff Atlas, who's too swole to control and must be knocked off his bearings by massive punching bags, Miss Petunia, A former model, Nana, the presumed mother of Neville or Lydia, who attacks by way of deadly knitting needles capable of shredding through one's flesh. Slim Bankshot, a lonely pool shark who's mastered the art of clearly not pool. Henry and Orville, mischievous twin brothers to Chauncey, whose mobility is their best trait. Madame Clairvoya, a fortune teller who, oddly enough, aids Luigi on his quest before gladly accepting her own vacuum-sealed fate. And Boo Lossis, a bouncing ball of booze whose plump body is susceptible to popping. Area 4, the last area of the game, comes packaged with some of the hardest portrait ghosts to capture, which include Uncle Grimly, who's probably the most basic of all the portrait ghosts actually, the Clockwork Soldiers, fought in what appears to be a child's playroom, Soupy, a little girl whose undeniable anger issues are far too apparent, Jarvis, I don't want to know what the fuck this guy looked like when he was alive, Sir Weston and Vincent Van Gogh, both of which I've already mentioned. And of course, King Boo himself, disguised as the treacherous, towering turtle anyone can recognize. Now, I've only shown you quick glances of all these unique ghosts, and yet their differing skills and personalities are already easy to point out. But there's more I'd like to say about them and why I believe this game approaches its bosses so well. It doesn't take much thought to realize that most of these ghosts are related in a sense. Nana is quite clearly the grandmother to the 4 children living in the house, who are the offspring of Lydia, whose husband is Neville and brother is potentially Grimly. Spooky is of course the family's pet. Shivers is simply the butler hired to keep the mansion's many rooms looking polished and presentable, and all the others such as Van Gogh, Clairvoya, Weston, Bankshot, etc. could all potentially be close relatives, with Jarvis, the Clockwork Soldiers, and Bogmire just serving as enigmas as to their identities. This idea of them all being related in some sense is backed up by not only the fact that most of them have their very own rooms, but also their own paintings and even statues within the mansion. For nearly all of the ghosts to have some sort of recognition within the mansion's decor implies they all share a close bond. This is something unique to Luigi's Mansion, as while the game takes place in only one compact area, to be able to make connections between the bosses you encounter and see all of their own rooms provides a fun, charming element to the game. Being able to conjure up ideas in my head as to who I would be fighting next was extremely fun, and kept me on my toes as I thought about what crazy character I'd meet in the next room. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the concept of foreshadowing. Many games foreshadow events that will soon transpire or characters that will soon be met. Most of the time, foreshadowing is enacted relatively closely to the reveal of that which is being foreshadowed. However, in some games, such as Xenoblade Chronicles, an event that occurs 60 hours into the game will be hinted at within the first area. Luigi's Mansion is a game that uses the former method. It hints at what bosses will be encountered shortly before they're actually fought. And though with this method there's little suspense to be had, it's still a nice way to get the player wondering about what they'll be up against. Chauncey, the first main boss, is slightly foreshadowed within the first room of the mansion, the foyer, where if the player walks under the massive chandelier, it drops down in an attempt to crush Luigi, as a baby can be heard laughing in the background. After Chauncey is turned into a portrait, this trap is no longer active. Chauncey as well as the twins are also briefly mentioned before their fights in a few of Neville's books, where hints are given as to how to do them in. A few others, such as Melody, Shivers, and Mr. Luggs, are foreshadowed very briefly. Melody's music can be heard in the hall before she's fought, as can Mr. Luggs' incessant gobbling of food, giving hints as to what kind of ghosts they are before they can even be seen. Shivers is handled a little differently, where he and his sphere of fire can be discovered as soon as he's found. However, he must be left alone for a while until Luigi can actually find the fire needed to frighten Shivers into his room, where he can be subdued. And lastly, as King Boo does count as a portrait ghost, I suppose it's worth mentioning how his whereabouts are discovered in Area 3, far before when he's actually fought. The bosses in Luigi's Mansion are tackled in a very interesting way. Despite most of them proving to be relatively unchallenging to take down, each and every one of them was still a pleasure to come across thanks to their quirky personalities, hobbies, styles, and living quarters. Finding a new boss only to begin speculating about where they fit in the mansion's family tree was one of my favorite parts of the game on my first playthrough. And now, despite no longer having the surprise factor that it did on me at first, Reuniting with these bosses that I now know like the back of my hand still proves to be fun to this day. And as the game can be beaten in one sitting, I find myself spending at least one night every October to sit down and rediscover their wacky faces over and over again. I still don't know what the hell Jarvis is though.